we've got people rolling in with us for our last AHA with Amplify of the season. We're really excited that we have our last AHA today, and we're going to be talking about HR and leaves. We have Kristen and Kathy from Synergy HR, and it's obviously a very applicable topic. It's crazy that we're sitting here in June and it's the last AHA of the season. As most of you know, we take July and August off because we're hoping that you're going to be in Europe or on a beach or at a golf course or something more exciting than learning with us. As great as our topics are, like today, there's lots happening in the summer, and it's much too short of a season around here. So we will join you again in September, the third Tuesday of September. We're going to have Adrienne back from Risk Oversight. She's an expert in documentation, and she's the author of a best-selling book, 24-Hour Rule. So it'll be an exciting opportunity for us to reconnect and have Adrienne come and present to us again. We've had her before. I love her productivity and how she's really great at instructing us with practical ideas to get things done. So that's our kickoff in September, AHA with Amplify. We're also really excited to be looking at live event for AHA with Amplify with some M&A specialists. We're going to do some breakout rooms and have some experts facilitate at some tables in small groups. So that will be in either September or October. We're looking at the dates and bringing on some of our favorite M&A experts. And you can imagine who we anticipate having come join us. It'll be OT, it'll be Jordan, it'll be a few others. We're really thrilled that we're going to have that opportunity. So please make sure to watch for the emails and sign up for the live event. It will be a small 65 maximum event, and so it will sell out. So make sure to sign up the minute you see it come out, and it'll be in September, October, the date to be determined. Our AHA with Amplify reconvenes third Tuesday of every single month other than July, August, and December. And so we're excited to see you back here in September. So today, what are we doing to wrap up the season? We're talking about a really important topic. And I think business owners, business leaders, talent managers, people managers, all of you are impacted these days by this topic. And certainly leaves, other than maternity leave, are generally tough times, right? They're tough times for our team members who are at the heart and soul of our organizations. These are the people that get things done that we love and that we want to support. And it's challenging for them to be in a position to need a leave. And obviously, as someone who's trying to run a team and run an organization and build a business and give back to the community, it's really tough when you don't have reliable staff and you don't have staff available because of unfortunate circumstances. So how do we navigate all of this? It's emotional, it's tough. We all want to do the best for our people, for our business, for our community, and it's tough. And the rules are really complicated, actually. And so I'm sure we're all going to learn a lot. And unfortunately, it's pretty applicable for all of us. Would wish it wasn't, to be honest, but sadly, Kristen knows that most of us don't want HR to ever be applicable because it always seems to be when there's a problem. And so we are here to learn from you and hopefully avoid any situations that we have to call you on. Thank you so much.
Perfect. Thanks for the intro, Jamie. Really appreciate it. And just to be clear with everybody, I've got my sidekick, Director of Operations, Kathy Kopelchuk, with me here today too. So I invite Kathy and Jamie and Nikki to chime in to guide the conversation a little bit more, or if I'm missing a piece of information that you think it's really important to share with everybody, that's great. I love doing these things, and it's funny because I'm getting text messages from old colleagues and friends, and it's nice to see you online. So it's thank you for joining us today. We really appreciate it. We're talking about leaves today. I'm going to share my screen really quickly here and start a slideshow. I have too much probably experience in this area, and sometimes it's really hard to figure out what's the most important piece of information to share with everybody. But before we get started, I want to tell you a little bit about us and why Jamie invited us to talk to you guys today. First of all, I know Jamie from the Women's Presidents Organization, which is a great organization that brings women entrepreneurs together. To be honest with you, I spend $2,500 a year to be part of that organization so that I can have 15 female best friends that speak the same language as me. So it's been really fantastic. I've been running my organization for about 17 years. So our organization's name is Synergy HR Consulting, and we're a team of senior HR professionals, HR support individuals, including payroll specialists, admin coordinators that are dedicated to helping you build your best workplace. So we did a funky exercise not too long ago, and we did a calculation on how much experience we actually have in our hallowed halls. And, you know, not to age us, but we have over 130 years of HR experience on our team. So we're super excited about that. We're growing. We are currently looking for great senior people that want to join our team and help organizations like the ones that you work in build really great workplaces. We focus on providing fractional HR solutions for businesses of all shapes and sizes. Now, I'm not going to read out the slides to you because everybody's going to get a copy of the slides afterwards. But I do want to say that we don't niche market ourselves. We feel that people are people, and we have enough experience on our team to be able to touch all industries, which means that we do work with accounting firms. We work with the healthcare industry, we work with the construction industry, we work with, I would say, oil and gas services, oil and gas production businesses, and we also do a lot of work in the Lower Mainland, Vancouver, with various other light industrial industries and manufacturing. So we have 4 pillars in our business. We do HR services, which is managing everything to do with, you know, bringing employees in and helping them have a great experience. We also do full cycle recruitment. We offer training and development like this, package training, and we also do custom training. And we recently added managed payroll services, which I'm not sure if that was a good idea yet, but
the jury's still out on that one.
Yeah, that's right. But in the last couple of years, we've evolved. And in January 2023, we actually started a new part of our business. So we have what I would say one of the first employee management systems designed specifically for non-HR pros. It's designed for small businesses, and it helps businesses save time, save money, and mitigate risk. As my PowerPoint had a little hiccup there. So our Frank HR system is simple HR technology that does the doing and thinking for you. The real magic in the system is the built-in workflows, so that, you know, busy CEOs and their support personnel don't have to think about HR systems and processes. The system works automatically for you. So that's put us into the new century, I would say. So I want to get started, but before we dig into the subject matter, I want to set the stage a little bit for moving forward. We get a lot of calls from business owners and leaders that are dealing with very challenging leave situations. We also get calls regarding simple leave administration, like, hey, I want to implement a use it or lose it policy. Can you help me? This chat today is about giving you some information and tools to help you proactively manage all of your leave scenarios. We're going to focus later on in the presentation on trickier situations. We have a lot of information to go through, and I'm going to move pretty quickly. So for this reason, I brought Kathy with me, who's my Director of Operations, and Kathy and Jamie and Nikki are going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions or comments or concerns, then I would invite you to put that information to the chat. We will give you very specific opportunities to chime in and ask questions throughout the presentation through the chat. Jamie and Kathy and Nikki will bring those questions forward as we're moving on. Oh, another hiccup on my slide deck. There we go. So I want to talk about managing leaves, and I want to say, first and foremost, to set the stage, that all of our information and our discussion is focused on provincially regulated businesses, okay? So if you're a federally regulated businesses, this would be a transport company or a company that works specifically for the government across the country, then you are federally regulated, and there's a different set of rules and legislation that guides that. We don't do a lot of work with federally regulated organizations, but we do have the knowledge inside of our business to support those organizations if they need the help. We are also not talking about employees that are covered by some sort of collective bargaining unit, okay? So if you're covered, if you have employees that are covered by a collective agreement, then of course we have the capability to help with that, but this specific presentation wouldn't necessarily, some of the nuances of this presentation won't necessarily apply to organizations like that. So I want to talk a little about leaves, and when we think about leaves, we typically think about vacation leave, sick leave, occasionally half day off to take your kids to the dentist, or maybe maternity or parental leave. And we typically think we have it covered until we don't. So leaves can be complicated, disruptive, but very necessary. And when we run into a situation where someone hurts themselves while on vacation, or a simple cold turns into something unexpected, like a longer illness, or a family member has a crisis and your employee needs to leave to care for their loved one, or even when one of your valued employees is struggling with their mental health, these are the terrible situations. And as humans, we want to be able to be treated fairly, with dignity and respect and empathy during these times. The truth is that our full-time employees give us a third of their day, 5 days a week. And as employers, it's in our best interest to ensure that they can show up each day as their best selves. So today, I'm not going to tell you how you should talk to your employees. I'm going to assume that you're all strong leaders and have the basic tendencies of humanity, meaning that you'll be able to show your employees care and empathy when they're dealing with their most challenging situations, and that you'll do your level best to help them navigate their personal situations within reason, of course. So today, what you will learn and what we're going to focus on is primarily on leaves that are not related to some form of occupational illness or injury, like twisting your ankle on a work site. Today, we are going to learn about types of leaves, the different types of leaves that your employees might be eligible for. We're going to talk about your obligations as an employer when it comes to granting and managing these leaves. We will discuss best practices. This is process policies that will help you set expectations, communicate and respond appropriate to leave requests. We will talk a little bit about how to manage your risk so you can steer clear of human rights complaints, stay compliant with the law, and ensure that your employees stay content. Finally, we're going to talk about, and this is a tricky one, playing chess. And this is about dealing with leave situations that go sideways. And we want to make sure that you leave this discussion today with some tools in your back pocket so that you don't get yourself into some quicksand. So allowing your employee to take the time they need to rest and recover and enjoy life outside of work minimizes the risk of a more complex leave situation and increases overall productivity. We've got lots of statistics that support a comment like that. There are several different types of leave, and to be clear, I'm not going to spend time going through a comprehensive list of what's available to employees through legislation, but I will tackle some of the more common leaves and some of the leaves that can cause trouble. The rest can be easily researched. So I was thinking about how to present this best to you, and rather than just go through a list of leaves, I want to categorize these leaves a bit and talk about types of leaves. The first type of that we're looking at is paid versus unpaid leaves. So paid leaves would include your vacation leave, sick leave if you choose to pay for it, could include training and studying time that's paid. And we talk about paid leave, it's pretty much any time that an employee is away from their duties, but you, the employer, are providing wages. Unpaid leaves, which might also include sick leave, and yes, there's some overlap there. It might include leave of absence to go traveling or to study. It's usually discretionary. It could include some form of disability leave, It could include unpaid vacation time, but unpaid leave includes any time that the employee is away from their duties, but you, as their employer, are not paying their wages. The second type of leave is insured versus uninsured leave. So insured leaves are the ones where you or the employee pays a regular insurance premium to provide salary continuance of some sort while the person's on the prescribed leave. The most common 3 types of insured leave are WCB, where the employer pays the premium, LTD, where the employee should be covering the premium in some way. And the third leaves are insured leaves that are covered by Service Canada employment insurance benefits. Uninsured leaves are those leaves offered or granted to employees that do not have any insurance covered. So like vacation leave, leave to study or train, these could be unpaid or paid, but they're not insured. The third category is job protected leave or legislated leaves. So these are leaves such as maternity leave, jury leave, reservist leave, where you as the employer are legally mandated to provide the leave, meaning the law says you must approve or allow this leave to happen. These leaves can be paid or unpaid. They can be insured or uninsured or even subsidized. But what the key obligation here is that you have to grant the leave and you have to return the employee to a similar or the same position. I think the next leave is probably my favorite kind of leave. And these are discretionary leaves. I think they're really undervalued and underused in organizations today. They're not required. They typically have nothing to do with work. They might be for travel, they might be for study, they might be care for a family member that isn't covered under any other sort of legislative leaves. And they're typically not paid and not insured, but they have the huge potential to help you with your retention issues. So for instance, if you have an employee for 3 years and you say after 3 years, hey, maybe you'd like to go on an extended vacation, that employee is much more likely to stay with you for that 3-year period of time to be eligible for maybe a 3-month leave of absence to go traveling in Thailand than an employee that doesn't have that option inside of an organization. So I do think that there's huge power in discretionary leaves, that it's sort of untapped. The fifth category is this notion of emergency versus planned leaves. So emergency leaves are the scariest leaves for you and your business and your employees. Usually are a result of an unexpected illness or injury and typically cause some form of emotional distress and productivity disruption in your business. These are leaves where someone gets in a bad accident and your colleagues or peers are distressed by it. The work is usually left emergently. A planned leave would be like vacation, maternity, parental, or discretionary leave, and they're typically legislated or insured leaves, and you see them coming and you can prepare your business for continuity. The hardest part of navigating all of these leaves is that each province has their own set of rules, regulations, and requirements and obligations with respect to these leaves. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on Alberta and, for contrast and where it's needed, British Columbia. So the 2 provinces side by side, where probably most of our clients are working right now, or where most of you are from or have employees in, where it's necessary, we'll do some comparing and contrasting between the 2 provinces. So moving on, let's talk about some very specific leaves. But before I get into looking specifically at leaves, I want to explain the process. You're all going to get a copy of these slides, so I want you to understand how I've laid the slides out so that when you go to reference them in the future, you can actually look at the slide and go, okay, that makes sense. Kristen wasn't crazy. So first and foremost, when we present the next few slides, we're going to have the leave name at the top. And then down the right-hand side, you can see that we've got all of the types of leaves listed. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the leave name at the top, and then I'm going to highlight the type of leave it is in green on the right-hand side. So you can see in this particular slide, the unnamed leave is unpaid, uninsured, discretionary, and an emergency. So something like that might be a situation where one of your employees has to travel to Nova Scotia emergently to help look after their best friend who was hurt in a car accident. So there's no legislative leave that covers that. They don't fall into any specific job protected leave, but obviously this might be a situation that's really important for your valued employee to be able to hop on a plane and go help their best friend.
Kristen?
So that, yeah.
We've had a message in the chat. We've got someone participating who has most of their employees in Saskatchewan. So can we sprinkle in some Saskatchewan where applicable? And we do have clients in Saskatchewan, so we can certainly do that as well.
Okay. Kathy, I'm going to count on you to provide some color there then.
I will. I'm on Saskatchewan watch. Having grown up there, good Sasky girl, I can do that.
Thank you. Okay, and then the third part of the slide that's going to be important is I'm going to, in the body of the slide, address the reason for the leave, what your obligations are. I'm going to bust some myths, okay, because there's some misconceptions out there. I'm going to talk about some provincial differentiation, and Kathy, that's where I'm going to count on you. We're going to talk about some of the risks and in some cases, some of the facts that you need to know about the specific leave. And so we're going to probably chunk through about 7 different types of leave here in the next probably 15 or 20 minutes. If you have questions, pop them in the chat. I'm going to give you some time at the end to have your questions answered. So the first one is vacation leave, which we all love. It's earned time off for rest and relaxation and unplugging. So if you're a business owner, this is probably a foreign topic to you, but most of your employees should have the ability to really unplug. Vacation leave is typically spelled out in the employee's job offer and in the employee handbook. It should include a section on how and when an employee should ask for vacation time, and the contract should be very specific about how much vacation time they're going to accrue in a typical annual period of time. Now, some organizations accrue vacation from the employee's start date, and some organizations accrue vacation from January 1st to December 1st. And so if an employee is starting fresh on June 1st, their first year of vacation will likely be prorated if they're on that annual cycle. Something that most people don't know is that vacation is typically broken into 2 pieces. One, vacation pay, which can be earned on a paycheck or provided to you as pay during the time off. And the second part is vacation time. So when we're talking about vacation leave, we'd like to talk about 2 things: vacation pay and vacation time. Okay, your obligation as an employer is to ensure your employee takes the leave in the year that it is earned. There's always exceptions to this. Like if you have a crazy busy year and one of your employees has 3 days off at the end of the year, you're also required to provide time and pay for those individuals that have earned paid time off, and provide time only for those individuals that have vacation paid out on their paychecks. So at Synergy, we typically pay our employees vacation pay on their paychecks. We have a very flexible work environment. But then we also say to them, look, you're entitled to 6% vacation pay on every paycheck, but you're also going to get 15 days to completely unplug. That's your vacation time. One of the myth busters I really want to break is you cannot create a use it or lose it policy. You can pay out the vacation pay, but you must always give your employees time. So if you have a year that goes from January 1st to December 31st and someone accrues 15 vacation days time and they get paid 6% vacation pay, you have to give them the time, but you can pay out the pay at the end of the year or on their paycheck. That makes sense, Kathy?
Yep, it sure does.
Good. So you can create policies that allow for vacation carryover. And some provinces have specific stipulations around this, and it's important to mitigate your risk by putting the parameters in place, like carryover must be taken by the end of the first quarter, or you can only carry over 5 days in your policy. Vacation, the big, and I'll get to the risk here. Province by province, the standards for minimum entitlement and time for accruing leave vary. And in some provinces, they actually have graduation lists. Like I believe in Alberta, what we've got now is if you get to that 5-year mark, then you automatically move from 4% to 6% according to their legislation. The risk is cost accrual associated with vacation carryover. So if you have an employee that's just grinding away and not taking their vacation time, the risk to your business is that they're going to carry that vacation accrual and the costs associated with it over into the next year. And that can become a very large snowball. I think in one situation, when we had an employee that was leaving an organization, we had a vacation accrual bucket of close to 50 days, which can hit the bottom line fairly large if you're not a large organization and can't absorb that cost. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, Chris, I was just going to add a Saskatchewan flavor. Saskatchewan starts at 3 weeks and moves to 4 weeks of vacation, and it's pretty much the only province that is providing for 4 weeks of vacation at this point.
And 4 weeks after 5 years, right?
After 10 years.
After 10 years. Okay, yeah. So it's legislated.
Yeah.
So if you're not sure what's required in your province in terms of vacation, you can look it up in the Provincial Employment Standards Code or just pick up the phone and give us a quick call. I think the big takeaway when it comes to vacation leave is that you as an employer can actually force your employees to take vacation. And you know what? If you have an employee that gets to December and they haven't taken any of their vacation, this is a recipe for burnout. And so in order to avoid an emergent, I'm burnt out medical leave situation, it's prudent to sit down with that employee and talk about a plan so that they can take some time off. Okay. So the next leave we're going to talk about is sick leave. And sick leave is in place to help keep your workplace safe and allow employees time to recover. And sick leave is typically, and when I'm talking about sick leave, I'm talking about leave. I have a cold. I shouldn't come into work. I really don't have the mental capacity to sit in front of my computer at home and do my work. I need to rest and relax. The intent is to get your employees healthy. Sick leave is a fairly recent addition to many provincial employment standards codes, and recent from COVID. So BC, for instance, added 5 paid sick days and an additional 3 unpaid sick days to their employment standards obligations for employers just shortly after the pandemic set in. So provincial requirements vary by province, and your obligation is to give the employee the legislated time off with or without pay as per the law. So BC legislated some paid time and some unpaid time. In Alberta, we don't have any legislated short-term sick leave. Right now, there are 3 or 4 provinces that require employees to provide paid sick leave. And I believe 2 of them are out east, BC, and then I believe it's the territory of Nunavut that has paid sick leave for provincially regulated organizations. Mythbusters. And we learned this, you can actually not prorate sick leave for employees in BC. So for instance, if you have a new employee that joins your organization in BC in June, you can't give them 3 paid sick days and 1.5 unpaid sick days. They get the entire allotment, regardless of when they start throughout the year. What this does is for employees that move between employers, once or twice or several times throughout the year, means that they can accumulate several paid sick days if they're job hopping from employer to employer. So it's a bit of a very employee focused policy in BC.
Kristen, it's also doesn't matter if you're part-time or casual, you still get the time.
The full.
So there's absolutely no prorating for start date or hours.
Yeah, and I know for a fact that we have some lovely people online that are doing HR in BC. So, we'd love to hear your war stories. If you want to put them in the chat or share some questions or some new revelations with us, we'd love to hear them. So employers do have the right today to ask for medical documentation. And this would be a note from a doctor. So if you felt like an employee was abusing their sick leave or the sick leave went beyond 3 days, you can ask the employee to provide you with medical documentation. So just covered the provincial stuff. The risk to the organization is abuse, overuse, inappropriate use, lack of documentation, or an employee returning to work that isn't completely recovered, or an employee returning to work after they've been off of an excessive sick leave can cause a disruption to the workplace. So here's some, and this is light, okay? A small business with 40 employees with the policy that provides for 5 paid sick days will cost on average $45,000 a year for this small business. So federally regulated businesses are required to provide a whopping 10 paid sick days per year to each employee. And this is assuming a low base salary of $59,300 a year. Okay, so sick leave can be a very, very cost intensive program for your business if it is not managed properly. So make sure that you've got the right policies, processes, and management systems in place to make sure that this is not being abused, overused, or used inappropriately in your business. The next one I'm going to talk about is bereavement leave. And bereavement leave allows employees to grieve and attend services or legal matters associated with the passing of a significant family member. So most organizations have some sort of bereavement leave. We work with a lot of small businesses, and the typical small business that doesn't have a bereavement policy will just let you go with pay to attend a funeral or to care for a family situation or a legal situation. The problem with small businesses that do that is that that can be precedent setting. And when you grow, this can also become a financially onerous burden on the business. So it's important to make sure that you manage this appropriately. So obligations vary by province, but the reality of it is that you must give the employee the legislated time off with or without pay as per the provincial legislation to support the employee through this situation. Mythbusters, a lot of people believe this is an Alberta thing. I think in BC it's different, but in Alberta, you only get 2 3 bereavement days per year, not per grieving or loss situation. So this was something I read the other day because I've been doing this for 25 years, and I just assumed that, if you lost your mom, and then 6 months later you lost your dad, you'd get 2 different sets of bereavement leave. But in Alberta, employers are only required to give their employees 3 days of bereavement leave per year, regardless of how many situations they encounter. Seems a little bit inhumane. Kathy, any thoughts
I
on
was going to
that?
say, I don't think we're recommending that would be a good practice from an employee relations
No, I don't
perspective,
think so.
but
Yeah.
just a good point to show how the legislation can be quite narrow or quite broad, or quite different from province to province, but not necessarily a good idea to implement restricted bereavement leave, I think.
Yeah. The good thing
not
is the
advisable.
legislation is pretty open, and employers can make their own choices on how flexible they want to be with respect to situations like this, and whether or not they want to compensate employees for those times. So we've built bereavement policies where employers have added the additional 2 days for travel if you have to travel outside of the province to attend a funeral service or a legal matter. So sometimes employees in those situations would be eligible for up to 5 days. The risks associated with bereavement leave are, of course, abuse. It's really hard to ask somebody to provide a death certificate. And so, there could be abuse if someone said, untruthfully that they had experienced a significant death in their family. And the other aspect of this is that the definition of family can be quite limiting. So, I mean, this is Pride Month, and, we want to respect equity, diversity, and inclusion across our businesses. And families look different for everybody. And so what we do see is some of the provincial legislation gets very tight on the definition of family. And they really haven't taken the time to move into the new century and respect everybody's diversity when it comes to that matter. So the risk is that, your policy might not be loose enough to include looser definitions of or diverse definitions of family. And unfortunately, pets are not covered under and I have a lot of pets that I consider family, and I will probably grieve hard when they leave, but I won't get bereavement leave for that. The fact is, you can ask for evidence if you feel somebody's abusing the situations, and employers can choose to subsidize this leave, so it could be a paid leave. So that's why up on the right-hand side, we've said it could be paid, could be unpaid. It is legislated in many situations. Sometimes it's emergent, and sometimes it's planned. Okay. Next leave is short-term medical leave. And so this is a scary leave. This is when sick leave, the 3 to 5 days that you offer your employee, just isn't enough. And so short-term medical leave usually maximizes itself at about 16 weeks for medical purposes. Okay. This is a super gray zone. In Alberta, we actually call this leave long-term medical leave, which can be very confusing because the next slide, we're going to talk about long-term medical leave. So in Alberta, the terminology is a little bit strange, but it's really meant to cover that zone where an employee, goes for major surgery or has a broken leg, or suffers some sort of accident or illness that keeps them out of the workplace for longer than their available sick leave time. Okay, so this is an interesting leave. It can be paid, it can be unpaid, it's insured, and I'm going to talk about that in a second. Most provinces have legislation around this. It can be emergency. So if someone gets on a car accident on the way to work and they seriously hurt themselves, or it could also be planned. So if you have planned surgery. What I do know, and Kathy, I think you could probably chime in and add a little bit of color to this, but if you have planned surgery for cosmetic reasons, I don't believe it's covered under this leave. Okay.
I don't think it would be either, but boy, that's a good question.
I know.
Well, it's kind of the conversation we were having earlier where, sometimes something cosmetic actually leads to a mental health illness because somebody is depressed over their appearance. And so doing something cosmetic can push them back into feeling more self-confident, and you avoid a different medical situation. So
That's right.
the gray area we live in HR.
Yeah, it is. And this is a really hard leave. A lot of small businesses don't have any policy, infrastructure, or process around managing these leaves. In fact, I worked for an organization some time ago, and I know there's someone on the call here that is familiar with this organization, but they had a self-insured strategy, which means that if anybody needed this leave, they could go on it and they'd have full salary continuance. But what we were finding over a period of time is that leave, because there wasn't any rigor in place around managing that leave, that leave was getting abused. And so that organization chose to self-insure, and they chose to continue down that path. We were able to implement somewhat successfully some rigor around getting doctor's note and doing follow-up and making sure people successfully return to work. But I don't know where that organization now is with that, but there is potential risk of huge cost there. So in Alberta, and I believe in BC as well, we have 16 weeks of legislated, I'm going to call it short-term medical leave, but the Alberta government calls it long-term medical leave, which means that if an employee qualifies for this leave, then you must grant them the leave, and you must return them to a same or similar position if they return to work within that 16-week period. If they do not return to work in that 16-week period, then your obligation to return them to work somewhat goes away. And so hopefully we'll be able to tackle a couple of those scenarios later on in the conversation. That's where everything becomes very scary and very gray, and where your leave management can go offside. Now, I'm saying that this is paid, unpaid, or insured for a reason. One, some companies choose to actually buy a benefits package that includes insured short-term disability. The premiums on this are super expensive. But if you feel like you're in an industry where people are going to be accessing this leave frequently, then buying an insurance package through a benefits provider to cover the premiums associated with someone taking that leave, covering that benefit, then it may be worthwhile. But you would have to talk to an insurance broker to find out and really crunch the numbers as to whether or not it's worth your while. For smaller organizations, I typically recommend that they do not insure this, that they do not self-insure it. That means provide salary continuance, but that they actually give the employee what I would call a medical leave of absence without pay, because Service Canada does provide employment insurance benefits for this kind of leave, which means that if I break my leg, I'm going to assume I'm an employee, I break my leg, I'm in traction, I need 8 weeks off, then I can actually go on a leave of absence for medical purposes and collect employment insurance benefits for that 8-week period of time. The reason why I make this recommendation to small businesses is because it puts the onus on the employee to dig in and do a little bit more work and be a little bit more accountable for providing evidence that they're actually eligible to for this leave. So now they don't actually have to provide a doctor's note to me, the employer, but they actually have to provide evidence to Service Canada. And Service Canada will do a very good job of, on the surface, monitoring your eligibility for that leave. So I have a personal situation that I encountered last year. So my daughter had a bad accident in the pasture, and she ended up with a compound fracture of her skull and ended up with a significant amount. She ended up on leave for the entire summer. And Service Canada was quite diligent about making sure that she was actually eligible for this She had the titanium plate to prove it. And I was actually quite impressed that they were diligent about this. But for small employers that cannot afford to subsidize this leave personally, can't afford the short-term disability premiums, then offering the employee a medical leave of absence without pay and supporting their application for Service Canada Employment Insurance benefits is a great way to go. And it helps manage the leave. Now, employers that want to be more generous can do a sub-payment top-up to the EI premium to make sure that the employee is taken care of financially. So you can basically take the employee from earning the 54% that they would on employment insurance up to 70 or 80 or 100% of salary with a sub-payment. Like I said, these leaves are legislated, which means that you have to grant the leave, but you can ask for medical evidence and manage that process inside your organization. So one of the complications, sorry, I just fast forwarded through this for a second, didn't mean to give everybody a headache, but one of the complications that have come up recently, and Kathy and I have been talking about this, is the new Service Canada medical leave coverage is actually 26 weeks, not 16 weeks. So now we have employees going, hey, I'm actually eligible for 26 weeks. The reality of it is the provincial legislation has not caught up or changed. So we have employees that have job protected leave for 16 weeks, but they're eligible for 26 weeks of EI insurance premiums. Kathy, tell everybody how that's complicated life.
Oh, well, it's part of this is going to lead into our next topic, which is long-term disability, which is built around the 26 weeks. And some of us will remember the days when maternity leave changed from 12 months to 18 months with Service Canada. And then, the provincial entitlement to the leave was still only 12 months. And we had employees saying, you have to give me 18 months because EI will give me 18 months. Well, the EI rules are trumped by the provincial legislation. So always look to the provincial legislation. But we are finding that employees now are trying to stretch it and are also a little bit reticent to apply for the next leave that we're going to talk about, which is long-term disability. And the timing is not lining up. But as always, the insurance industry and the legislation will probably sync up over time. But for now, it is awkward and is not at all helping us navigate through these tricky waters of getting employees back to work, where they think because they're entitled to EI, they can stay off longer. Under protection, and that is not in fact the case. Now, they may still be disabled and unable to return to work. That's a different scenario, but it is not because of the EI rules. It is because of their medical situation, and we always want to bring things back to what is their medical status, and are they or are they not fit to return to work?
Right. And I think that, the risks associated with the short-term medical leave are the same as any other leave, abuse, inappropriate use. But now we get into lack of documentation. So if somebody's off on leave, they're saying I'm sick, they get a doctor's note that says Kristen needs to be off for 2 weeks. There's no return to work date. There's no reason for the leave. I have no idea what's wrong with Kristen or how I can support her. And these leaves can snowball out of control fairly quickly, particularly, when there's extension after extension after extension. And if they don't apply for long-term disability, after 16 weeks, your obligation to return them to work goes away. And that's not to say that you're not going to be forced to return them to work, depending on the circumstance. But now you have a little more flexibility as an employer to decide what you need to do to support your workforce planning. The fact is that this is the grayest area of leave, and it is the area of leave where we get the most calls. I think it's really prudent to have the right process, policy, and management infrastructure in place around this leave.
I think we'll talk a little bit more about this in some of your best practices, Kristen, at the end, but just a heads up for everybody. When you get into these medical situations, you are not only dealing with the leaves under employment standards, but you are touching on privacy law, you are touching on privacy legislation and common law around privacy, and you're touching human rights. And so it becomes very complicated to know which set of rules you need to respect at what point in the process you're at. So very important that you have your act together and you know what your process is.
Yep. So in the interest of time, we're going to speed up a little bit here. We're going to talk about long-term medical leave. So this is what happens after 16 weeks or 119 days or 120 days. So typically long-term medical leave is unpaid, but it's insured. So if you have a long-term disability premium that shows up on your paycheck, great. Long-term disability is typically planned because you can see it coming. So there's no obligation to provide leave for medical purpose beyond 16 weeks provided, but a lot of employers find themselves with employees on long-term disability and don't know what to do. So one thing I want to point out first and foremost is that it's really important that the employee, not the employer, is responsible for paying the tax on the premium. So typically what happens is that long-term disability premiums are paid with after-tax dollars so that the employee, when they're collecting the benefit, can collect the benefit tax-free. So long-term disability usually pays about 70% of the employee's income. So if they can receive that 70% without being dinged by taxes, it does help them when they're on leave. One of the mythbusters is that you've got to provide this leave no matter what. The truth is you do not have to provide this leave without sufficient evidence. There's no obligation to provide employment continuity or continue benefits coverage during this leave either. So I will talk about some best practices around creating some structure around this. But what we have seen is we have seen people on long-term disability for years where the employer is holding that position for that individual, and you do not have to do that. But you do need to provide the appropriate communication and structure for the employee when they do go on this leave. There's no provincially legislated requirements around this leave. The risk is lingering leave without sufficient evidence of medical disability. And then when someone's been on long-term disability for a long time or long-term medical leave for a long time, and you choose to have them rejoin your workplace, you may have to accommodate them if they've acquired a disability, or and that return to work can be fairly disruptive for employees that have been around for a long time. Fact is, this is probably one of the most misunderstood leaves. I think that a lot of employers believe that if an employee ends up on long-term disability, that they have a long-term obligation to that employee, and they do not. And so we would encourage you to reach out for help if you end up in a situation where you see a long-term disability situation going off into perpetuity. I'm going to just touch on legislative leaves really quickly. So this is any leave that an employer is legally obligated to provide qualifying employees. These would include maternity leave, parental leave, adoption leave, compassionate care leave, critical illness leave, domestic violence leave, reservist leave, jury leave, death or disappearance of a child leave. There's all sorts of legislative leaves. Most provinces have the same types of leaves, and employees are typically eligible for these job protected leaves after a mere 90 days of employment. Okay. Interesting fact is that if an employee qualifies for one of these leaves, but they do not have 90 days of employment with the employer, you do not have to protect their job. They can be eligible for the leave and not have job protection. 100% of these leaves are unpaid, which means that the employer is required to approve the leave, but they do not have to pay the employee while they're on their on this leave. A lot of these leaves, most of these leaves, have some sort of Service Canada insurance component, so the employee will be eligible for EI benefits. Interesting, you must return the employee to the same or a similar position, and the employee is eligible while on leave to continue all of their employment benefits, which means that they are eligible to continue their medical and dental benefits. They're eligible for wage increases if that's a benefit that you're offering across the board. They're eligible for any other changes in benefits or regular benefit that's part of your benefit cycle. That was a new one to me, Kathy. I was reading that the other day and I was scratching my head about that. The myth busters is that you are not at the mercy of the legislation or the employee, which means, what do I mean by this? It means that at the end of the leave, you have flexibility as an employer. So the time an employee is on one of these job protected leaves applies to their length of service. I'm just looking at my notes here. So while employees are on leave for job protected leave, that time that they are away still applies to their lengths of service. So if you are going through a severance exercise with them later on, that leave period needs to be included in any sort of severance calculation.
Or their vacation thresholds, you know, as they're
Yeah.
moving up from 3 weeks or 2 weeks to 3 weeks. Yeah.
And with respect to this myth buster, I'm trying to think, what did I mean when I wrote that down? What I mean is that you do have some flexibility on how you manage these leaves. So for instance, you can't stop the employee's medical benefits, but you can ask them to pay the premiums if that's something that that you do while on leave. So it is important to put some policy structure around this. You don't need to reiterate the legislation, but there are nuances that you need to address. Most of the provinces are very closely aligned with this legislation around legislative leaves, and the risk is the business changes over time and the returning employee may no longer fit. And so we see this a lot where someone goes on parental leave or maternity leave or long-term medical leave, and when they go on the leave and a new employee is hired, the employer falls in love with the new employee and doesn't want the old employee back. And unfortunately, you can't switch that. You have to return that employee to their same or similar position. The other risk is the employee leaves prior to returning to the business. And I always look at those situations and I think they're unfortunate if someone's been on maternity or parental leave and they decide that they're going to take a position with another employer and they don't give you sufficient notice. It doesn't really allow the business to move on quickly. But I also think too that it's happy times for everybody if everybody's happy in the end. Fact is, employees must meet all of the eligibility criteria, including notice periods, to be eligible for this leave. Okay, so we could split hairs here, but the reality of it is that, you know, if there's a legislated requirement for employees to give 4 weeks notice and they give you 2 weeks notice, it calls into question their eligibility for the leave. Discretionary leaves, again, my favorite. These are a simple leave of absence without pay. They can be offered as a general retention tool. And some employers allow employees to bank time or pay to cover the provide salary continuance through the leave period. I think this is a brilliant retention tool. I love this idea. I highly recommend that you put a structure in place, an agreement in place if you're going to allow somebody to go on one of these leaves. The truth of this and a myth buster is you have no obligation to return this person to your workplace. But if you choose not to return them to your workplace, if they've gone, you know, camping in Tanzania for 6 months and they decide they're ready to come back to work and you say, no, we don't have a job for you, you are required to terminate them as per the appropriate provincial employment standards legislation. But the time while they are on this leave does not count towards any termination pay or severance pay calculation because it's a discretionary leave. There's no legislation. The risk is, again, like any leave, the business changes, the person's no longer a fit, or the person leaves prior to returning to your business, and they don't meet the obligations that they've agreed to in the agreement that you've put together. Employers have complete discretion over this, and it can be a great retention tool. I want to just take 5 minutes quickly or less to see if there's any questions or comments coming in on the chat. Jamie, is there anything that you're seeing that we need to chat about?
Yeah, a couple questions. So since you brought payroll onto your services, you'll know this either from a payroll perspective or a HR perspective. But if somebody's coming back from a leave, any of the leaves really, and then they actually resign, do you need to issue a new ROE to them, or is the ROE that they got when they went on the initial leave sufficient?
Depends on the type of leave, because they may not have enough hours to qualify again. So we would typically issue a second ROE to show that they've quit, and then it would be on the employee to reapply because it's a different type of benefit with Service Canada. So, but they probably wouldn't have enough hours to qualify again. But
I think the Service Canada benefits are like a side thing.
yeah,
I think from an employment, a proper practice perspective,
you would do the
someone's
ROE.
on maternity leave, they resign, you issue them a new ROE that says they've resigned.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So vacation, couple questions on vacation. You mentioned that there's no such thing as a use it or lose it policy, but just for clarification, most of the provincial laws do allow an employer to force use of vacation. So I guess the alternative to a use it or lose it would be a forced time, so that you don't have the accruals and that massive liability to account for and deliver on. Is that accurate?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
But just a heads up, most provinces have a notice period. So it would be like you have to give the employee two weeks of notice that they will be on vacation. So just make sure you're compliant with the timeline. But yes, you can do it.
Yeah.
You mentioned in the slides that that there is a potential that an employee could owe an employer vacation. From a practical perspective, I'm not sure I've ever seen that, or I don't think it's best practice, but do you want to just expand on that a bit since you had it in the slide?
Okay, so I think so are we talking about like a termination or a separation instance where the employee's taken too much vacation? Okay, so typically what you would do is write a really nice leave policy that basically addressed this issue, and it would say, look, if on separation you've taken more vacation than you actually earned, we have the right to deduct that balance from your final paycheck. And that's the way to best deal with that. Is that the question you're asking, Jamie?
Yeah, I just noticed on your slide and I thought it was interesting because I certainly have never seen an employer make an employee pay back for vacation, but just wondering if there was more on that.
I've seen lots of it actually, Jamie. So the different perspectives. So what happens is when it depends on how you're managing your vacation, but some employers would say you have 15 days to use in this calendar year. And then somebody plans the trip of lifetime and takes all 15 days in February and then leaves in September. And so they wouldn't have actually worked the whole year to accrue the 15 days. You would be able to claw back. You would say you were only entitled to 10 of those days. You took 15, you owe us 5 days back. But it has to be clear in your policies and your employment agreements to be able to claw it back.
I'm just going to ask a couple quick more questions, and then I want to get to the best practice. And there is more questions, and I'm not forgetting them. I just don't want to miss out on the best practices. But a quick one. So just to clarify, I think you were clear, but I just want to clarify. If someone is on a long-term medical leave, you are not obliged to hold their position or bring them back. But having said that, that will not impact the fact that insurance will continue to pay them out as long as they meet the eligibility for the insurance. Is that accurate? So you're not cutting someone off at the knees by terminating them. They'll still be covered under their insurance, of which you helped contribute to put in place. Is that accurate?
Absolutely. You're bang on.
Okay, so there is more questions. I will get to them, everybody, but let's make sure that we get these best practices, because I know some people can't make it all the way to 1:30, so I just want to give everyone the best chance they can to see it all.
And you know what, Jamie, a commitment on our part is if we have questions that we don't get to, we're happy to do an FAQ and add it to the package that we send to you for distribution.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. So I'd like to take a moment to really get into best practices. And so we're going to focus on turkey leaves for the rest of the presentation. We're not going to talk about vacation leave or sick leave. We'll talk about some more nuanced leaves, those gray areas. Our goal is to help you manage sick, short-term disability, and long-term disability effectively so that you can minimize the disruption to your business, help your employees, and mitigate risk. And what I mean by risk is you don't want to end up in a human rights situation because you decided to terminate somebody who is now claiming they have a disability. Okay, so most of these best practices are focused on being proactive. Okay, and it's really important. So the first thing when you're hiring a new employee is to set expectations on day one. So have a rock solid employment contract that clearly outlines their leave entitlement, and it should also have a clause that clearly states that if the employee is unable to continue to perform their duties for a certain amount of time, like 6 months, that you have the right to terminate the employment relationship. Okay, so this is part of your termination clause. We want you to be able to have these exit doors in situations so you're not hanging on to employees that aren't productive or productive contributors to your culture. Clearly outline your expectations around absenteeism and sick leave in your employee handbook. So best practice job offer includes a job offer, which is your culture document that says we love that you're joining us. You include an employment contract or an employment agreement, which sets the legal foundation for your employment relationship. And the third component is every new hire should get a copy of the employee handbook before they sign their contract. And the reason why I say this is because we want them to know all of the terms and conditions of their employment before they decide to come work for you. Okay, so job offer, employment agreement, employee handbook. That's the trifecta of a great foundation laying of your employment relationship. Make sure your new employees read and understand your policies. So there should be some sort of signature acknowledgement that you can put on file that says, yep, Kristen read everything. She can't pretend she doesn't know. The fourth best practice here, there we go. Show your employees how to use your leave management tools. So if you have a time tracking system, make sure that they know how to request leave, who's going to approve it, and how much advance notice that they have to give for leave, any kind of leave. And then I think most importantly, and I told you at the beginning, I'm not going to tell you how to be a great leader because I'm going to assume you're all great leaders, is create a safe environment for having honest conversations. These honest conversations, these vulnerable conversations, like, Kristen, hey, you know what? The last couple of weeks, you've been coming in a little bit late every day. What's going on with you? Oh, I'm just really stressed out because I've got some conflict in my marriage and I'm not sleeping well. Being able to have those conversations with your employees, and that one's a pretty raw one, you can preemptively help that employee so it doesn't turn into a 16-week or 26-week or 52-week medical leave situation where they're dealing with mental health issues. Best practice number 2, have great leave policies. 1, make sure your policies answer critical questions. Are they entitled to benefits, and who pays benefits premiums while on leave? How much notice should be given? What are the eligibility requirements? What information are they required to provide? What happens on their vacation time while they're on leave? How do they return to work? And then make sure your policies are all communicated, understood, and accessible. You don't want your employees using the excuse that they don't know, that they never got a copy, that they've been left in the dark. We also don't want employers saying, hey, this never happens here. We don't need a policy for it, because I'm going to tell you that when you need it, you will wish you had it. So make sure you have a really well-written policy around your leaves that's understood by everyone. Best practice number 3, and this one's a little bit trickier and probably more applicable to large organizations, but have a great leave management process. You can have your HR team create something, but you want to dot your I's and cross your T's. Use official communication when people are going on longer leaves. So for instance, you get a leave request, you send supporting documentation to the employee that says, we've received your leave request, here's what you're entitled to. Know your timeline, okay? So if you know that an employee is going on leave Monday, know that you need to follow up with them 2 Mondays from now and find out how they're feeling. Make sure you follow up. Make sure you pick up the phone. Make sure that you document things through email. Make sure that you follow up with the employee. So if I send you a doctor's note that says I'm going to be off for 6 weeks and I give you no reason, I'm hoping at some point as an HR person, you're going to pick up the phone and call me and say, hey, Kristen, how's it going? Do you need anything from us? Can we help you with anything? We're expecting you back at work in 6 weeks. Is that still the pathway forward? I can't stress how important it is to make sure that you have a rock solid return to work process and policy. The last thing you want to do is take an employee that's just had open heart surgery, have them return to the workplace without a fit to return to work exam, and then have them have another heart attack at work. Because now you're in a big messy field of WCB claims and mental health claims and stress related crimes. Be consistent with how you use your leave management process and apply it across the organization, right from the admin assistant to the CEO. Everybody should be treated the same. 4th, have a clearly defined return to work process. And I just talked about that. Returning to work too early or with an injury that isn't managed properly could result in further claims against the business. So ensure the employee understands that you will have to verify their fitness to return to work. So just like they need a medical note to go on leave, they need a medical note to return to work, because you want to be sure that your employee is healthy and fit to do their duties. The other piece of this is exploring necessary accommodations. It's really prudent to ask, even if a physician hasn't mandated accommodations, to ask the employee, do you need anything special from us? Do we need to support you in any way? Because the last thing you want is to have the employee come back into their position. Let's say they've had a repetitive strain injury. The doctors assessed everything, said, yeah, they're good to return to work. And then the injury just gets inflamed and worse, when it could have been easily accommodated by eliminating one of the small responsibilities or duties that that person has to do. Confirming the return to work date is really important. And the reason why I say this is it leads into that gray zone. So if you have an employee that said their doctor's note says they need 8 weeks off, make sure, 6 weeks, you're contacting that employee and confirming that they're going to be back to work. If they don't return to work, then that's a whole nother bag of worms that we have to deal with. And then, you know what, when they return to work, make it a celebration, make it a good thing. Make sure the rest of the employees don't feel uncomfortable around this person, and make sure that you take the opportunity to make them feel comfortable coming back to the workplace. Number 5, this is a good one. Recognize the early warning signs. And what do I mean by this? So leaves can go sideways fairly quickly. And what we are seeing more today are claims of mental distress or general mental unwellness. So there's some key warning signs. Absence without notification. So an employee doesn't show up to work, that's a huge red flag. Failure to communicate. So when an employee is on sick leave and you ask them for medical documentation, can you please get me a doctor's note that tells me when I can expect you to return to work? And if you get ghosted, or there's radio silence, or you don't get appropriate documentation, that is a huge red flag. Failure to provide satisfactory evidence. So we're seeing more and more, and Kathy can speak to this a little bit because there's some legislation coming out of Ontario on this, that doctor's notes have become very vague. So I've seen doctor's notes that say, you know, Kristen needs some time off from work. How much time? What for? Can we provide her with accommodations? Is she experiencing mental distress in the workplace? What can I do to make it a safer place for her? So all of those questions are going left unanswered. And Kathy, maybe share what you learned today.
Yeah, we're seeing interesting things around doctor's notes. So, you know, traditionally we've relied on medical evidence to help us manage these leaves. So we listen to the doctor or the, you know, the specialist or whoever it is. You can determine what you consider qualified medical practitioners. But we rely on them to tell us the employee needs to be off work. We rely on them to tell us that the employee can return to work. We rely on them to tell us what accommodations are needed. But we're finding it that more and more it's difficult for employees to get the doctor's note. So more and more employees don't have family doctors. They can't get in to see them fast enough. So there's a trail in terms of the timeline to get the actual medical evidence. Plus there's fees being charged to provide these notes. And we're bumping up against privacy legislation because as non-medical people, we shouldn't have medical information. And so there's just a lot of noise around collecting medical notes right now. And in fact, we're also seeing doctors who are refusing to provide doctor's notes because some of it's after the fact. So particularly when you're asking them to support 3 or 5 days of flu, and the doctor says, I didn't see you while you were sick. I don't know if you were supposed to be off or not. So there'll be some changes coming down the pipeline in terms of how we're going to navigate this latest twist and turn around doctors.
It does really put a wrench into how or if or how much we can manage medical leaves.
Yeah.
A couple other warning signs: reluctance to apply for benefits and insurance. So if the employee doesn't want to apply, they probably don't qualify. Lots of extension requests, constantly extending without any additional information. And then I think it's always important to satisfy your duty inquire and ask the employee what's getting in the way of you returning to work. The sixth best practice, and then we can pause for a second. Be the good person and do the right thing. I think this is always an important approach to take. You need to pass scrutiny. If things go sideways and you end up in court or you end up with a human rights lawsuit, you have to be able to substantiate that you've done all the right things. You need to meet your minimum obligations, and if you can, go beyond them. Go above and beyond when you can. Give the benefit of the doubt without sacrificing your business's integrity. And what I mean by that is, assume that people are honest and good and that they legitimately require the leave until you learn otherwise. Treat everyone the same so that you don't have a paradigm inside your business when the lawyers come sniffing around that looks like you treat Sally different than Frank. Ensure that you can sleep well at night. I mean, this is human, right? We're dealing with people under stress in terrible situations, whether it's an accident or a loss of a loved one or mental distress or chronic illness. People are not at their best. Let's have as much empathy as we possibly can have for these people. Jamie, I know we're running out a little bit of time. There's another question slide here, but I really want to talk about the next 2 slides. Can we skip this and keep it for the end?
Let's do that.
Okay, so I want to talk a little bit about when things get tricky, and I'm going to blast through this. So the best practices, what I mean by tricky is when the standard rules and processes just aren't working or they don't apply. And so a couple of examples might be that when an employee takes sick leave that turns into short-term medical leave but refuses to provide appropriate and sufficient documentation, or when you have an employee has a mental disability, including a learning disorder, a developmental disability, or an illness such as depression or bipolar. And it's not just an acute medical health concerns, but disabilities that are chronic and reoccurring. Another situation is when your employees have a physical disability, including those that limit or impair their person's abilities to do their normal duties on a regular basis. These are not common leave scenarios. They might be reoccurring scenarios or scenarios that frustrate the workplace. So what we want to do is understand that you have a moral and a legislative requirement to protect your employees and support their challenges within reason, and provided it doesn't cause you and your business undue hardship. And so this whole question of undue hardship is very much a real but subjective assessment of whether or not the business can afford to manage and accommodate the employee. So an example would be an employee that goes off on leave, ends up as a paraplegic as a result of an accident, but your business is on the 10th floor of a huge skyscraper. It's undue hardship, in my opinion, to expect the business to move everybody down to the main floor so that the employee doesn't have to take the stairs. It's also undue hardship to ask the business to install some sort of elevator or lift for this employee up 10 floors. So I think it's really important that, you know, we do everything we can to mitigate the risk beforehand and be the right guy, right? The good guy, the good person in the big equation. So at the end of the day, to mitigate your risk, implement best practices. Document, document, document. If you see a leave going sideways, dot your I's, cross your T's. Ask for medical notes, follow up in writing with everything. The trick is to find the balance between meeting the employee's needs and what the business can accommodate, and knowing where that tipping point is. And it's different for every leave situation. So it's really important to get help in these situations. Don't go it alone. I want to warn you about Google searches. So I bumped into a Google search the other day, a little bit out of touch with regular day-to-day HR stuff. So I Googled, does Alberta now have sick leave? Because I wasn't sure if they had updated their legislation. And what came back is, yes, Alberta employees have 10 days of paid sick leave. But when I looked deeper, it's federally regulated, or public servants in Alberta have 10 paid sick days, not the average Alberta employee. So be careful when you do Google searches. Your whole goal in these more challenging leave situations is to do what's right for the employee morally and ethically, and from a business perspective, to support their recovery and well-being. The second goal is to do what's right for the business within reason. The third goal, and probably the overarching goal, is to mitigate risk to both parties, to the employee and the business, and hopefully end up in a situation where the employee can successfully return to work as a productive member of your community. I want to talk a little bit about playing chess. So when things get tricky, you need to slow down. So first and foremost, know your rights and obligations. Second, always be the good person so that you can pass scrutiny if it ever ends up in a courtroom situation or a human rights challenge. Take one move at a time. Ask the employee for a new doctor's note and a return to work date. Confirm the return to work date. If they don't show up, give them a call, wait for their response, and then respond. So it is very much like playing chess when you are dealing with very challenging leave situations. One party makes a move, the other party responds, you choose to make a different move. And then the final point is always play chess with the end in mind. And the end in mind should always be what's right for the employee and what's right for the business, and the balance that you struck between the two of those. Jamie, those are the key issues that we wanted to tackle today, and we're right on time. I think we've got 5 minutes left to tackle some questions, and any questions we can't tackle in this time, we're happy to do an FAQ for.
Perfect, thank you. So just for some clarity, there was a few different types of leaves, and if someone comes back from a leave and then they're terminated, there's certain cases where their time on leave counts towards their employment length of service, and there's times when it doesn't. Just to quickly summarize, because we had some questions, the discretionary leave does not count towards length of service, even though you granted the discretionary leave. Are all
Correct.
the rest counting towards your length of service, basically?
Any sort of job protected leave would count towards your length of service. If someone is on long-term disability for 2 years, that does not count towards your length of service, okay? It gets a little bit confusing in there, but it's not a legislated leave, it's not job protected leave.
Okay, so that's kind of the
Rule of thumb, yeah,
perfect.
included.
So within privacy laws, if a person comes back and they're reliant on a prescription drug in order to return to work, or maybe they need certain accommodations that it's up to them to take the drug or to use the, I don't know, the brace or whatever in order to be safe at work and to perform their job. How does an employer deal with that, where potentially a person that has certain disabilities, and if they're not on their prescription drugs, isn't actually showing up in the way that they were expected to show up or able to do the job? So how does that work in terms of privacy and accommodations?
Well, I think this is where it's important to get help from professionals like HR people or safety people. Anybody that needs a brace or some sort of medication to perform their duties safely needs to disclose that to the workplace in order to keep the workplace safe and secure. And they do that in a confidential setting with an HR manager or a senior leader in the business. Your drug and alcohol policy should very clearly state that employees need to be in sound mind and body to be able to execute the duties of their role. And so if they're in the accounting profession and they're taking some sort of medication that impacts their ability to make decisions in judgment, then that needs to be disclosed, and a decision needs to be made whether or not that person is appropriate for the role based on accommodations required. So those are very, very tricky situations that could lead down to human rights issues. And so it's always good to get advice and counsel around situations like that. And your drug and alcohol policy, which is another important piece of your workplace, will feed into the company's response around medications and prescription drugs and non-prescription drugs and abuse of drugs and non-prescription drugs.
Excellent. In terms of vacation, so if you have a termination, do you owe vacation based on statutory minimum or the employment contract? And I think it's the employment contract, but we did get the question, so I want to make sure that we address it.
It would be as per the employment contract if what's been awarded to the employee is greater than the statutory minimum. Yep. If it is not stipulated in the employment contract, then you would revert to the statutory minimum.
And in most provinces, first year of employment, people are accruing the minimum vacation, but you don't actually have to give the time. Is that accurate, or how does time versus payment work in the first year of employment?
I'm going to let Kathy answer that one.
Well, technically, you are correct. The legislation says you would work a year and then start taking vacation, which means there is an accounting implication as a vacation pay liability sitting out there. But by and large, we see that most employers, just from an attraction and retention perspective, cannot afford to tell somebody you're going to wait a whole year before you start vacation. So we are seeing people more in the take as you earn scenario. So they're earning and taking at the same time in the year that they're working. And so that's kind of back to the question you asked earlier, why would somebody owe it back? And it's because we're letting them take it as they earn it. And sometimes you get out of sync. But many employers are doing better than employment standards, which is allowing you to take it as you earn it rather than wait a year.
Yeah, I would echo that. I mean, our clients, and especially as a recruiter, I don't
Yeah.
think you ever see cases of waiting a year anymore,
Yeah.
despite the law, but it's
You
good to clarify that. So one thing that came up the other day, actually, as an, it's immaterial, but it was interesting, and you guys brought up doctor's notes. Somebody mentioned that in an entrepreneur event the other day, that actually, if a doctor's note is required as part of your policies, that the employer actually has to pay for the doctor's note if they want to submit it. So certainly not a material amount of dollars. Most doctor's notes are $2,500, but something to think about if you're a manager of a team member, that potentially you'll have to get that through the expense policies. And that's accurate in all provinces?
Yeah, I
Yes.
think it's just best practice for sure.
I think
And,
it's
yeah,
just a caveat to that, make sure that the doctor's note doesn't go with the invoice to the accounts payable team.
Yeah, good point.
We see that from time to time.
Actually,
oh, we've got, I think Jamie's frozen. That's not us on our end, is it?
I don't think so.
Oh, I don't know what happened.
Oh.
Do we have any more questions in the chat?
Oh, there, she's back.
sorry, it just shut down on me. It was the weirdest thing. And they said send to
It's
Zoom.
okay.
Don't like it.
You had a beautiful face on, so it wasn't one of those like ugly Zoom frozen faces.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, sorry. We're almost done actually. Just quickly, you spoke about top ups. Obviously, it's not at all unusual for companies to top up. You mentioned a couple examples. It's common in maternity leave. Just for some clarity, if an employee is receiving EI and then they get a top up, that still allows them to have the maximum EI. Is that accurate?
Yeah, but you do have to register your sub payment plan with Service Canada. And there will be tax implications around stuff like that. So, but yeah, if you do that without a sub payment plan, you could be causing a world of grief for the employee come tax time.
Okay, so that's a great point for business owners. If you want to top up, you need a, say it again.
It's called a supplemental unemployment insurance benefits plan. So a sub plan, SUB.
Okay, so a sub plan for business owners is required to be submitted so that your employee gets the full EI, and the top up is literally a top up, which is subject to regular tax, but doesn't impact the EI that's earned.
Yeah, and you know, I think in any business, when you offer employees a cash benefit like that, I think you have to do it with a long-term strategic perspective, HR strategy in mind, because once you offer something like that, it's really hard to take it away. So
absolutely, yeah.
Sure,
all right, we are through most of the questions, but as mentioned, Kathy and Kristen are happy to take your further questions. You can contact them with any of your needs. We really appreciate this. We had some real practical and awesome content that we discussed. If anybody needs anything from Amplify, obviously you know where to find us. I thought I would just point out a little funny. I recently did my graphic too, Kristen, about our years of service, and we're at 560 years as a team right now.
Oh,
good for you guys.
And yeah, 7 years of CFO experience on average, and 45 years of ERP, 17 years of CPA on average, and 340 years of CPA experience. So it's so funny that you brought that up, because I literally just finished that graphic like in the last week. So I had to wrap up on that funny. And so maybe we'll send that out in our email. We'll also be sending out the deck as Kristen has generously offered. And of course, we'll send out the videos. So if you need to revisit any of it, you can look at us again right here on YouTube. So thanks so much and have a great summer. Hopefully it becomes summer soon.
thanks, Jamie.
Bye.
Thanks.